Beautiful, lovely and chilled song to get us going. Hello and welcome everybody. It's great to be in this space. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. My name is Melis Jikalu. I use she and her pronouns. I am currently based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, and again, always setting the scene. If you hear any baby squeals or cockerels, anything interesting in the background, and apologies for that, but that comes with my territory. For those who need a bit of a visual description, I'm a Black cisgender female presenting person. I identify as queer bisexual. I have Black Afro hair. I'm wearing a pair of clear glasses and wearing a bottle green dress and sitting in what looks like a little cage, but it's actually my chair. So for those who don't know, well, I'm the program director of We Create Space. What is We Create Space? If you've never, or maybe it's your first time encountering us, well, we are a global nonprofit platform, a community and collective of queer change makers, really on this mission to improve the lives of LGBTQ plus people around the world. And we currently support, amazingly, 100 plus corporate partners at varying stages on their DEI journey. And the way we do this is through consultancy. We design shared learning experiences, produce DEI insights, craft or bespoke kind of content, and really centering around supporting individuals and strengthening their roles as change makers within their organizations and their communities. And as a nonprofit, you can imagine, for us, it's so important that all of the work that we do is community-led. We are also a social enterprise, and all of the profits that we do and raise from this work, corporate work predominantly, actually goes back into the LGBTQIA plus community, offering free events like this one, resources, leadership development opportunities, and wellbeing solutions. And for the last 2 years, we're so proud to have delivered over 1,000 plus events and shared experiences, and really investing over £250,000 back into the community. So we'd love for you to continue to support us. And we've just outlined some ways for you to get involved. As you're doing already, you're attending our event, you're here today. Thank you so much for that. Other things you can do also is, sharing our social posts. We're on social media, most of the platforms you can find us at. Please follow and join us and comment also and share. We also hope that you can amplify our speakers and their projects, and essentially also, if you can, introduce us to your employees or your colleagues for us to further our work within corporate communities and beyond. If it's your first time in this space, really welcome. Sit back, take the information as it lands, and we really invite you to kind of engage as much as you can. For those who are returning to these sessions, we're happy to reconnect, and we really hope this one is also such a super rich and insightful discussion. So on today's menu, well, we have an awesome webinar on how to avoid the comparison trap as DEI changemakers and really stay grounded in our why. We have an incredible team delivering this session today, Mark Travis Rivera and Nancy Didia. So as I mentioned, once again, please, this is a Zoom webinar. The Q&A function is there to welcome all your questions. Also use the chat to introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, so we really get this conversation moving forward and have this time as a community to reflect. So without any further verbiage from my side, Mark, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself and get us started. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Melis. Hello, everyone. Bienvenidos. My name is Mark Travis Rivera. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I am zooming in from Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States of America. I am a light-skinned Latinx man with makeup on, with short black hair. I have sharp, pointy black and gold nails with sparkles on them. I'm wearing a beautiful Kika Vargas Target collection dress that is like gold and yellow with hints of pink and florals. And behind me is a sage green wall with some floating shelves and some plants and candles and wards. I am today's facilitator, representing the We Create Space collective. And I'm a professional storyteller and DEI practitioner. And I'm super excited to be in conversation later today with the brilliant, the amazing, the persons whose shoulders I stand on, one of the many shoulders I stand on. Today's guest speaker is Nancy DeDia, who's the Executive Director, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and Head of US DICE for Boehringer Ingelheim, USA. And Nancy has been doing DEI work in the corporate sector for over 25 years. And she is, as we talk about aging and the world changing around us. It's so easy to forget how far we've come in such a short amount of time, but there's still so much more work to do. And so, Nancy, I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself in your own way, but Nancy is a pioneer in many ways, and I'm so thankful to be in conversation and community with you today. Nancy.
Mark, thank you. Good evening, good afternoon. Hello to colleagues around the world. I'm just delighted to be here. I'm Nancy DeDia. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Again, I'm wearing green glasses. I have gray, white, spiky hair. I'm wearing a blue striped blouse, and the chain that you see in my profile picture around my neck, it's a link chain. I'm wearing that today as well, and some sort of shiny red lipstick in addition. Thank you, Mark, again for that generous introduction. As you say, I've been doing this work for more than 25 years, so I've seen the good, the bad, and I guess what I can say, the ugly in the space of D&I work through the years. I'm thrilled to be here to see where the conversation will take us and to offer some insights and learnings I've had along the way. And again, I invite the audience to ask us anything, no holds barred. And to the extent I'm able to answer, I certainly will. We want to make this as engaging as possible. So thanks again to We Create Space for having us here. And Mark, I'm thrilled to be with you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone. So Nancy will be listening to the first section of the module. And so thank you, Nancy, for being here. I'm going to go ahead and give us a session overview. So in today's session, and the idea around comparison and the DEI changemaker comparison trap is really based on Dr. Brene Brown's research, primarily focusing on her book, Atlas of the Heart, and Daring Greatly and Dare to Lead and Gifts of Imperfections. And so today we're going to talk about the culture of scarcity, comparison, perception versus reality. That's section 1. And then we're going to pause and we're going to be in conversation with Nancy, asking some poignant questions related to all things DEI and queer leadership. And then I'm going to go to section 2 or section 3 of the webinar, which will focus on the acronym HIPAA. For those who are in the US, we're not referring to the law or around health insurance and health information. HIPAA is an acronym, and we're going to talk about that later, as well as self-reflection. And then we're going to go into Q&A with Nancy and myself and all of you. So super excited to have everyone here. Again, I want to thank Maylis and Michael and the whole entire We Create Space team for all of their help behind the scenes to make today's webinar possible. I also want to thank all of you for being here all over the world. You know, these events are only possible because people show up and because there's a need and a hunger to learn more. So I'm thankful that all of you are here today. So if we talk about culture of scarcity, as explained by Dr. Brene Brown, she defines scarcity as the idea of the crush of conformity from one side and competition from the other. It is trying to simultaneously fit in and stand out. Now, as a DEI practitioner, as someone who's an activist and a storyteller in my early 30s, I grew up at a time when thought pieces and speaking at various institutions of higher learning and giving talks at marches was the thing that activists did. And oftentimes, a lot of my colleagues in the work became what we call celebrity activists. And suddenly they started to shift, right? The way they engaged in the work shifted, the way they engaged with people shifted. And so there's this notion of there's not enough for all of us to succeed, and that we all have to kind of be comfortable with each other. And what that forces us to do is start to develop these crabs in a barrel mentality, right? So we're all in the same barrel and we're all trying to crawl out of this oppression, right? These systems of oppression, and we're knocking each other down, trying to climb to the top. And so scarcity is this idea of the use of conformity on one side and competition on the other side, right? And so we talk about, there's 4 results of culture of scarcity, and we're going to talk about number 2 today in particular, but there's shame and lack of self-worth. Number 2, comparison. Number 3, disengagement. And number 4, narcissistic behavior, right? And we'll talk more about comparison in the next slide, but I want to talk about what happens when we develop a culture of scarcity in the workplace, right? It leads to all of these things. People don't feel like they belong. They feel less than. They are constantly comparing themselves to their colleagues. They're disengaged in the work, which means they're not producing as much as they could or as well as they should. And they start to develop narcissistic behavior, which is never a good thing. Comparison, right? We're going to focus on that today because I think there's only an hour in this webinar, so we can't go through all 4 results of scarcity culture. But again, Brene Brown talks about this idea of swimming in your own lane, right? And the crush of conformity, again, from one side of competition to the other, is trying to simultaneously fit in and stand out. Comparison says, be like everyone else, but better. At first, it might seem that conforming and competing are mutually exclusive, but they're not, right? And I really believe this, that if we all focus on our own lane, right? Because there's so much work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's impossible to be the expert of everything, right? And even though I'm a unicorn, I belong to multiple marginalized identities, I still don't know everything, right? And so I know my lane and I focus on that, right? And I think that's really important, but I also understand because we're human, it is innately natural for us in many ways to compare ourselves to our neighbors, to compare ourselves to our friends, our families, right? As an early 30s queer man, most of my friends are engaged, pregnant, married, or dating someone seriously, and I'm still the same friend. So I'm often comparing myself to my friends when they start posting engagements and pregnancy announcements. So I get it. It's natural to do that. But the problem with comparison is that, one, it means that nothing that you have is ever enough, right? It means no amount of good work that you do is enough, and it means no amount that you gain is enough, and that you at your core are not enough, because you're always comparing yourself to someone else who is perceived to have more or to be better than you. So I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to ask you these following questions, and I want you to reflect on it on yourself, or you can put it in the chat. What triggers you to start comparing yourself to others? What do you do to manage the feelings that occur, both positive and negative, when you compare? And what would happen if you celebrated instead of comparing yourself to a colleague or a friend? So feel free to drop it in the chat, but I will review it later today. But I want you to think about that, right? Because when we talk about comparison, it's the idea that we're not enough, that we don't have enough, right? But what if you stopped comparing yourself to others and started to list all the things you do have and practice gratitude, right? This work is not easy. The work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not easy. It is draining. It is hard. Oftentimes, it feels like life and death because so much of this field has changed since 2020. The murder of George Floyd, the pandemic, the social uprising. This field, as we know it today, has been around for decades under a different guise, right? And everyone wants to do a checkbox. Everyone wants to do this work in a way that feels performative. But this work is not performative. But it's easy to get performative, and it's easy to focus on marketing and brand than actual impact. There can be a healthy level of competition, but there can be no healthy level of comparison. Because here's what happens when we compare. Whether we think we're better than someone or worse than someone else, right? On the flip side, right? We're comparing ourselves to someone who we think is beneath us, who's inferior to us, and then we're comparing ourselves to someone who's above us, who's better than us, right? And both angles of that comparison trap leads to feeling of shame or blame. It leads to disconnection. It does not foster connection. And so you have to ask yourself, as a DEI leader, as a queer leader, are you about building community and building connections and making impactful change to really move the needle forward beyond marriage equality, right? Or are you simply trying to look the part? There's a reason why queer folks are queer folks. Before the modern day marriage equality movement happened in the US and around the world, queerness was not about conforming to heteronormativity or standards of heteronormativity. It was about queering the way we live, how we think of love and faith and equality and our rights. The movement that started at the Stonewall Riots in New York City in the 1960s was a rebellion against police brutality, was a rebellion against discriminatory laws that prohibited trans and gender nonconforming people from dressing with certain attire. It was a riot. It was led by Black and brown trans people and queer people. But so often we lose sight of what it means to be a queer person today because we have come so far. But this global pandemic, in many ways, echoes the way we were treated during the HIV pandemic, especially with monkeypox, right? And so you cannot forget our history or where we come from, because history will repeat itself, right? And so let's talk about perception versus reality. What we see is through the lens of our perception that may not always be the reality of a situation or a person. Today, we are obsessed with our brand and marketing and presenting the best versions of ourselves. Hello, Instagram filters. Hello, Snapchat filters, right? We give the highlights and rarely show the low moments. What we perceive to be a person who is smashing it and succeeding may be a person who is struggling to keep up appearances. I am that person. I am burnt out because I've been operating at pre-pandemic levels with post-pandemic energy, and I am a people pleaser, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I have a hard time saying no. No, I'm not available for that. No, I can't do that speaking engagement. No, I can't write that essay. Because I'm afraid that if I say no, opportunities won't come back around, right? This culture of scarcity is prevalent in my brain, in my body, in my experience. As a first generation high school graduate and college graduate, as a brown, queer, disabled, poor kid who grew up in a single mother household in the inner city of Patterson, New Jersey, I should not be where I am today in my career. The perception is that, wow, Mark really made it out. He's someone, he's become someone. The reality is, yes, I've made it out, but the pressure of being the first and often the only people like you in the room is overwhelming. It is lonely. It is exhausting. And every day I make the choice to be myself, to be authentic, to say I am burnt out. You know, when Melis came to me with the opportunities today, I had to say yes because one, Melis is amazing. Two, Nancy is amazing. And three, it was talking about Brene Brown's topic of comparison and all these things. I thought, oh, I have to talk about this, right? Because everyone knows I'm Brene Brown's unofficial publicist, right? And I could come to you today in this pretty dress and this beautiful makeup and say, I'm perfect, I'm doing great. I'm exhausted. I've been up at 6:30 in the morning. My client canceled on me last minute and I'm tired. But here I am giving you my all because you all expect people to show up and be change makers and be ready. But we're first human and leaders second. So your perception of me and people like Nancy and I, and people who do this work, may be very different than the reality of who we are and where we come from. And for many of us, we don't do this work for the fame or the money or the recognition or the awards. And all of that is great, right? To be paid your worth is great. To get recognized is great. We do this because our lives are on the line. Because the life expectancy of a trans woman, a Black and brown trans woman in this country, in the US, is 35 years old. Although I'm gender nonconforming and identify as a man, I am perceived to be a trans person. And that means that my life expectancy is 35 years old, which means in 4 years, I may not be around. And I do this work because that is the reality of my life. 2021 was one of the deadliest years on record around the world for people of color and trans folks and queer folks. This work isn't about checkboxes and performative gestures and being the best of the best or being the most celebritized version of a DEI practitioner. This work is about life and death. This work is about making workplace cultures so that all people can show up and be themselves without fear of retaliation, without fear of losing their job, without fear of not being able to be promoted. Unemployment rates continue to be the highest among trans and queer people and disabled people who are also trans and queer. right? We cannot look at this as a separate or fragmented problem. We must look at this as an intersectional problem. So pause for a second. I want you to reflect on 3 questions. How do you present yourself online and in person? How do you lean into vulnerability? And what scares you the most about being authentic in the workplace? Feel free to drop that in the chat. I'm going to pause there for a second. Right? What's going on about, in the workplace, in your life, what scares you, right? I always say authenticity is a daily choice. Every day I wake up and I choose to be myself. And some days are easier than others. I've been spat on. I've been harassed. I've been threatened. I've been followed. And I thought my life was going to end. But every day, I choose to be myself in a world that hates me because I'd rather die living in my truth than live a lie. And people like Nancy and Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and Harvey Milk and so many other icons before me made this life of mine possible because they dealt with the brutality. They dealt with the harassment and the biases and the situations around the world. They endured so I can thrive. They survived so I could live my life in my truth fully. But there's so much more work to do ahead. So now I'm really excited for this part of the conversation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Nancy and I are going to be in conversation for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And Nancy, hi. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to jump right on in because time is of the essence. And I want to make sure we leave enough time for you to give your responses. The DEI landscape has changed drastically over the last 2 decades, especially since 2020. How did you navigate building a career in DEI as an openly gay leader? How did you navigate that?
Well, first of all, Mark, I think what you just laid out for us is the incredible journey that I think all of us experience who identify in the queer space or the LGBTQ plus space, however we identify. The past 3 years, to your point, have been the most challenging in the many years that I've been doing this work on a variety of levels. One, I think the pandemic was something none of us expected. 2, the exclusion of, again, I worry about access to vaccines and patients, getting access to medicines, things of that sort, and the fear that people had and the losses that we all experienced. Second, I think George Floyd added another wrinkle in the PTSD that we were all experiencing around the loss of a pandemic on a variety of levels. Our lives were turned upside down. And then to witness that and other world-changing, life-changing situations with our democracy, I think put us in a tailspin. And to think for a moment that the people that work in a company leave that at the door is a mistake. We bring those things with us, whether we try to suppress it or push it down. And the beauty of working for certain organizations, certainly Boehringer Ingelheim, is that people can bring that and know that they're safe because we hold space for that expression. And part of that time in the past 3 years, I've hosted more than 35 courageous conversations, which were really just open conversations for people to express. And they were emotional. And everyone listened to each other without trying to fix people or solve for them. And I think the fact that we've created that space for people to be their authentic self, and everyone that either identifies in a certain way, whether it's LGBTQIA, someone with a disability, and I also identify as a person with a disability as well. I think the most important part for us has really been recognizing, and you set this up really well in the beginning, around scarcity and conformity. it really does start with us and what we're comfortable being. And I know a lot of times we get lost in the fear of what others are going to feel and think or see. But what's most important is what we bring. And I like to refer to it as our spice, right? I like food. I like to cook. What's your spice? What's mine? And together with our spice, we'll make a wonderful dish. So for me, it's been probably the hardest time in my life, Mark. As a practitioner, as a chief diversity officer, I literally have felt that I was carrying the weight of our employees on my shoulder for the past 3 years, in addition to my own. And like you, I didn't create enough time and space for me to grieve, to feel the loss, to feel the sorrow, because I was so concerned about everybody else. And so it's, for me now, it's a time of rebirth, a time to renovate our normal. And it's not going back to what was, it's renovating what was to what can be and what will be, because we'll create it and we'll own it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nancy, I think you're right. I think this idea around so many people are trying to go back to pre-pandemic times. That is part of history. That is, we cannot go back, right? One, it wasn't working properly. There's too many people who were excluded. And number two, there has been so much that shifted in our world that going back to a version that existed pre-pandemic wouldn't make sense, right? And I want to talk about more about how you've and we can talk about the collective grief and PTSD in a second too, because I think that's really important to mention, is that, leaders are people. And I think sometimes when someone gets a CEO title or a VP title or a CDO title, we forget that they're people too, right? And they're also going through their own problems and their own grief and their own traumas and their own life issues. And we rob them of their humanity and then wonder why they can't be human with us, right? We can't strip someone of their humanity and then expect them to be vulnerable and courageous and bold and share things about the way they're feeling, because it impacts the way they lead. Because we live in a culture, primarily there's still things as vulnerability as weakness, even though to Brené Brown's point, to my point, and I think your point as well, vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage, right? And so how do you avoid yourself, over the last 25 plus years in your career, how have you avoided the comparison to DEI space when so many companies and practitioners are more concerned with optics and checklists? And can you share specific tools and resources you found essential for really avoiding the comparison trap?
Well, let me start with a little bit of my background and where I've come from. So I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised in Brooklyn, and proud of my New York heritage, but also raised Italian American in a very traditional household. And I didn't come out until my early 20s, or at least I didn't really identify with my gender expression or identity. And I chose at that time to marry a man and follow the hetero norms, because that's what my parents expected, right? And that's what they thought. But after 4 years in the marriage, I realized I made a mistake and I was suppressing my authenticity and who I was. And because of that, I was rushing to get away from something. I never finished college. And when I stand on a podium or when I stand on a main stage, I know I'm up there against MBAs and people with masters in public health and PhDs and doctors. But what I have that they don't have is a compassion for the people and an ability to engage with people in a way. So if I spent the time comparing my lack of an undergraduate degree to what I do for people and what I'm able to offer people, and that's my spice, right? That's what sets me apart. And it's hard for people to believe, like you, because I came from nothing. You know, I wore hand-me-downs as a kid. I had to work. My first job was a bank teller at 16 in a strip mall, not a strip mall, in a mall in Kings Plaza, Brooklyn. I made $2.65 an hour. And half of that money I had to give to my parents because they were of that traditional mindset. You work, you live at the house, you pay room and board. So I never got breaks and I'm not saying this for people to feel sorry for me, but I always had to push rocks uphill. And that probably explains why this work was attractive to me, because it felt like something that needed someone to persist at it. And any one of you that do this work or dabble in this work, recognize that it is the test of patience, resilience, endurance, and passion. But passion doesn't make change happen. It's the resilience, because so many times, you know, I also like to row. If your boat flips over, you don't stay in the water, right? Or if you fall off the horse, you get back on again. I can't count the number of times my boat's flipped over. I can't, you know, and I continue to get on and row in a different direction or head down a different path. But I'm proud of who I am and my differentiation. And I have to admit, Mark, it took me years to get there. When I was in my 30s, I was climbing this ladder to compare. Well, I should be able to get that same role because I'm gay now and I'm out, and that should help me because I'm a differentiator. But that's not what defines me. What defines me is in my soul and in my heart and what I give out to the universe, because that comes back tenfold to me. And that's what separates me, I think, from others that do this work. And this compassion and empathy about being vulnerable, because I can say to you, I'm not a crier, but in these past 3 years, I have cried more in the past 3 years than I have my entire life. And I think that the need for vulnerability to come through, the sadness that I felt on so many losses that we've experienced, the pain that I experienced with how patients were experiencing COVID or other, on top of that, other chronic conditions. And a shout out to my dear friend I know who's on this call, Monique Gormasi. She is just, she's one of the reasons that I do this work. She is a patient advocate, and she and I, she inspires me to do my best work, to get organizations, to get industry, to help patients get better access to medicine. So when I think about what's important, it's my why. And it's not about me. It's about helping others.
Absolutely. And that's good. That's a great segue into our third section of today's webinar, which is to talk about the HIPAA acronym and the self-reflection piece. And we already have some questions in the Q&A for the Q&A. So if you haven't already done so, please add your questions to the Q&A so that Nancy and I can get to answering them right after I'm done with section 3 of this webinar. And Nancy, I know there was one more question left on our list, but I'm gonna weave that in towards the end during the Q&A. So I have no fear, I will get there. All right, let me get to share the screen again and go back to our presentation. Can y'all see that okay? Yes? Okay, HIPAA, again, not the legal law for those who are in the US, stands as an acronym. And I want you to think about this as you move forward in your life and in your work. H stands for humility, the freedom from pride or arrogance. Our ego can be very dangerous in this work. I stands for integrity, the quality or state of being complete or undivided, right? P, purpose, which is what Nancy just alluded to. Why you do something, what drives you. A, the first A, authenticity, the quality of being real or true. And the last A is for accountability, an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. And let me tell y'all, this work isn't easy. And this work can be hard. But the only way you can get through this work in one piece, I think, is to truly reflect and to do this from a space of clear purpose. Again, when you are clear about who you are and why you do what you do, it makes everything you have to deal with more achievable, right? You feel like you can kind of get through that hilltop, right? You can kind of show up and get through it. But when you are hiding behind a mask, when you are allowing your ego to drive you, when you are sacrificing your integrity for money and for clout and for celebrity, when you are not honoring the calling of your life, when you're not honoring your purpose, right? You are on the wrong path. And by you not doing that work authentically, by you not showing up authentically as yourself, your impact is not reaching the levels it could reach. My premise of my TEDx talk was called Embracing Yourself, Embracing Your Potential. It wasn't until a near-death accident in 2012 that I realized that that mask I was putting on nearly cost me my life. And it wasn't until I learned to embrace myself that I unlocked my potential for success. So a year after almost dying in college, I was to go speak at Harvard. 2 years after that, I gave that TEDx talk. Because the moment I realized to take the mask off and be myself, the moment I started to be a person of integrity and living out my purpose and my why and held myself accountable to my higher self, I began to see success unlike anything I could have ever imagined. I used to get in trouble for speaking too much in school, and now I get paid to speak everywhere. My mother still can't believe it. She's still shocked. She's like, people actually pay you to speak? I was like, yeah, Mom, that's what I do for a living, right? And so you need to self-reflect as you listen to this webinar today, me and Nancy's conversation, reflect about how you want to navigate your next chapter, how you want to navigate your career and your life, keeping this HIPAA in mind. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we're going to leave. We have 20 minutes for Q&A or 15 minutes for Q&A and then a 5-minute wrap up. So I'm going to dive right into the questions I'm seeing. I'm seeing some comments from Tanya. So I'm going to go ahead and just read them to you, Nancy, because I think they're really sweet. Their first comment, I want to assume their pronouns. Their first comment was, I'm officially Mark Stan dash fan. Thank you, Tanya. I really appreciate that. Those words resonate so much to me. I'm so glad those words can resonate with you. Feel free to connect with Nancy and I on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Instagram, Mark Travivera. Nancy's also on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter, same handle. Tanya went on to say about Nancy. Nancy has touched a truth I have been lying to myself for so long. I wasn't expecting this conversation to make me tear up a bit this early. I'm a crybaby, Nancy, so I cry all the time. I'm surprised I haven't cried yet, okay? So just so you know, I'm a crybaby. So Tanya, I feel you. It's okay to let the tears fall. I feel like crying is a way of cleansing the soul. Carrie has a question, which I'm gonna answer live. And Nancy, I'm gonna direct this question towards you. Because the question said, couldn't comparison be useful in addressing systemic inequalities? For example, Nancy didn't graduate, presumably at least partly because of reduced systemic support of her queerness. Non-queer people in her field have a degree, and that distinction is important. That comparison is meaningful so that we can address it. So I'm going to pass over to you, Nancy, in 1 second, but I want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly, Carrie. So you're saying that by saying someone like Nancy who doesn't have a degree can make it, and you're comparing yourself to Nancy, you're saying that you don't have a degree, you also can make it. And in so many cases, that is true, right? There are many people who do not go to college. They either go to vocational school or community college, or they go to no schooling at all. They do a trade. But I think the problem with comparison, and Nancy, I'm curious about your thoughts here, is that if you're comparing yourself by saying, you know, Nancy doesn't have a degree and she made it to the top of her career, then I don't have to go to college. But when Nancy was coming up, the world was very different, right? And so could Nancy today, as a queer woman, as a gay or lesbian woman who go between femme and butch or gender non-conforming and fluid, could Nancy today achieve what Nancy back then achieved? Probably not. So Nancy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the comments, all of you, and those that have weighed in and questioned. I think I think the important thing about being out is trusting what you bring to the table that's different. So if you think of opportunities, and if you look at, and that person I think said it well, Chief Diversity Officer jobs usually require master's degrees or PhDs. So technically on paper, I don't meet the qualifications. And I can tell you through my career, there have been opportunities where I was pushed aside because I didn't have the education. And my argument or discussion with the recruiter was, well, I'm really disappointed that this organization wouldn't even talk to me. And that tells me everything I need to know. So it probably is just as well that we don't continue the conversation, because this isn't the type of organization I would thrive in or be able to contribute. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Right. And I think as much as earlier on in my career, Mark, this was what I would say a gap in my career. And a lot of times when I would update my resume and I'd work with a resume writer, they'd say, what do you want to do about your college education? And I said, put it out there, that I have credits. I just never completed my degree for a variety of personal reasons. And part of that was elder care, my parents aging, and not having the money to go, and my parents not having the resources to support me. And even though I went for a short period of time, I still wound up with tons of debt for the year or two I was there. Do I regret it? Not at this point. 30 years ago, I regretted it, Mark. Today, I don't, because I was going to be a broadcast journalism major. So I'm not sure how that would have helped me in my role today as a chief diversity officer. But it's one of those jobs when you're 5 years old, or especially when I was 5 years old, this position didn't exist. And, it's fascinating to hear kids growing up today to say, I want to do chief diversity officer work. And it warms my heart when they understand what that means. But I think we have, we still to this day have stigmas around our rigid requirements for jobs and roles that exclude people. And we are, quite honestly, we call it HET. You have HIPAA, I have HET, which is historically excluded talent. And I think LGBTQ, people with disabilities, and our Black and Brown brothers and sisters have also been primarily historically excluded talent in the workforce. And that's something I will work until my last day of being able to do this work, which I hope will be a long time from now, to ensure that voices are heard and that we have space, hold space, and advance people who are so deserving of the opportunity to thrive and grow. Oh, Mark,
Gotcha. I just want to add Carrie's point. Carrie also added in the conversation chat, Q&A chat, I mean that we should recognize that systems create inequity. And so it is good to compare the differing challenges between Nancy and her colleagues. Absolutely. And I think to that point, yes, Carrie, great question, by the way, around can comparison be used for good? There are positive and negative reactions to comparison, right? But I think that what happens is are we comparing ourselves within the same systems of oppression, or are we trying to dismantle the system so that everyone can be free, right? It's something that I'm constantly thinking about. We have an anonymous question here that says, how do you find the balance of being authentic, but not wanting to ostracize or be unable to make change? I strive to be authentic, but I also know that I'm afraid of not being an effective agent of change at work. Now, let me tell you something, and I'm going to answer this question, and Nancy, I'm pass it over to you. My first boss at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the premier criminal justice school in the community system in New York City, said to me, I don't think people can do their best work if they can't show up to work authentically. And I said, you sure about that? She said, yes. Next day I show up in a dress and heels. And she navigated that, right? And she allowed me to be authentic. She allowed me to do my best work. And I was one of the first visibly queer people of color, gender nonconforming at John Jay, at a time when the institution experienced a lot of change in leadership and growth. And I name that because I think that we often think that we have to tame who we are or change or conform who we are to be effective. But I can't tell you the number of messages I receive on a daily basis, or emails, or LinkedIn messages, or when people meet me in the street that say to me, because you shared that video, I went to therapy. Because you shared about your suicide attempt, I, talked about my suicide issues, ideation. Because you came out the closet as gender nonconforming, that inspired me to tell my mother that I was queer, right? And there's all these things, right? And the authenticity has a ripple effect. Because the more brave you are, the more brave others can be. By Nancy being brave, she led the way for me to be more brave.
Absolutely.
Right? And people are conflating authenticity with being unable to be effective in your role. The most influence I've ever had in a workplace or in a community setting was when I showed up and told my truth and spoke up and said what needed to be said. Because if you're not influencing from a space of authenticity, are you even being effective? Right? Nancy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Mark, you reminded me of a story that I'll always remember as probably a milestone in my career. And it was long before organizations were required to have gender affirming surgery, inclusive benefits for not just domestic partner benefits, but we also did gross up on payroll taxes because in the US, individuals, same-sex couples were taxed more so than straight couples. Well, straight couples were taxed as well, but I made a pitch to provide gender affirming surgery, first pitch. And my message here is it's all about the timing. Mm-hmm. And I was told years ago, never in your lifetime, because that's cosmetic and we're not going to cover that. So of course I walked away dejected and disappointed, but not giving up. And I waited, leadership changed, and I came back with a new pitch and a different pitch 2 years later. Within minutes after presenting to a new leader, it was affirmed and introduced. And to this end, the partnership that I've built with our total rewards overall has all been around, I would say, gender affirming inclusivity aspects. But had I given up and felt that I couldn't do this work, I've never given up. I've always come up, it's sort of like you hit a dead end. Well, what can you do? You back up, you turn around, you make a U-turn, you try something else. And my message to all of you is never give up. Yeah. In anything, not your life, not your attempts to make change happen, but always come at it slightly different than the first time. And if you need help, build your network to just run ideas by and start getting those sponsors, if you will, to be that voice when you're not at the table, to talk about the value of this and the importance. So that's my thing. It's all about the timing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's about timing, it's about the tactics, right? How you approach the pitch, all that, right? But it doesn't mean you change who you are, right? You don't have to conform or shift who you are, right? You just have to approach the work from a different perspective and a different tactic. And that has nothing to do with who you are. It's just about persuasiveness and leadership and influence. And so I hope that answered your question. I want to add, I'm going to go to, there's a few more questions. We're running low on time. So I'm going to prioritize Alexandra's first question, which is what tools do you both use to avoid burnout? So I'm gonna let you answer that first because I'm in the midst of it. So I'm trying to use the tools I'm learning, but I'm gonna go to you first, Nancy.
Yeah, I always make time for me. And if that means doing the things I love, scheduling a hike on the weekend, preparing things during the week so that I follow through on it, scheduling a day at the spa, or even just simply a mani-pedi, right? Some retail therapy works for me, meeting with friends, cooking, doing things that bring me joy, traveling, leaving things behind that irritate me, and putting myself in places like the ocean or the mountains that give me a replenishment of oxygen and clarity of focus and importance and relevance. Because at the end of the day, what's most important is this body and this mind. And I only have one chance to make it right, at least while I'm able to. And there is nobody or anything. And I'm a cancer survivor as well. I went through breast cancer. I have a history of horrible conditions in my family. And I have a couple of them, but I manage them. But the stress could actually exacerbate them and make them worse. So I will not allow other people's issues to impact my life and my joy.
Yeah.
I just won't do it. It's not worth it because I've been there. And I have to create that safety net, Mark, because just as you said, and I'm saying this for you, Mark, you're a loving man, you're a good man, and you have so much to offer, but you can easily get sucked in, right? Yeah. And the hard part is to know your limits, because you don't want to disappoint, but don't disappoint yourself. Allow your limits, set your limits and know when enough is enough.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Nancy. My life coach, Phoenix, and I have been working on that for the last couple of months. And she was the one who said to me, all right, we're going to shut down now. No more engagement in 2022. Don't say yes to anything on the spot. And she said, don't say yes to anything that's happening before 3 months out from now. So then what I did was I sent out a very blunt message on social media and in my emails and said, I'm not taking any additional engagements or new clients until April 2023. If you'd like to reach me, and I can refer you to someone else, but I am not available before April 2023. And similarly, this summer, I took some time off after Pride Month, because Pride Month is always a really busy month for me, but it was especially draining this June. Yeah. And I said to myself, Mark, you're exhausted. Yeah. And last week I hit the wall when I started not performing at my best, when I was producing things that wasn't as good as I know it should be. And I just wasn't feeling motivated, right? As someone who has depression and mental health disorders, it is so imperative that I find a better balance. And so my life coach, and your words to me, Nancy, is what's pushing me to not just learn my limits, I do know my limits, is to honor my limits, to honor my capacity. Because when I set boundaries around what I'm able to do and what I'm not able to do at this moment, it allows me to do what I do well at my best. It allows me to do what I do later at my best. And it allows me to say no to things that don't align with the calling of my life, which keeps me from resentment, which keeps me from regret, which keeps me from doing things I really didn't want to do in the first place. And so I want to honor that. And Tanya, we can get to your question, but that's due to time. But I would love Tanya to connect with me offline. Please email me. I'll put my email in the chat. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to talk to you about your question or your comment in the chat separately. And before we wrap up, Nancy, I want to give you a minute to say one or two closing words of something you're taking away from this conversation today.
Well, first of all, to We Create Space, a special thank you for creating this space. I don't mean to sound tongue-in-cheek, but this is so important for all of us. And so many of us always are fighting to to help each other and to help one another. And I'm glad you made the time today for yourself to engage, to listen, to reflect and explore. And know that as a community, we have each other. And that's really crucial. And you're not alone. And the moment that you feel alone, reach out to any one of us through LinkedIn or however you need to. And I want you all to feel supported and know that we can't do this alone, that we do need each other. And we need to hold each other tightly and hold space to honor our time and to honor our needs. And I'm just honored to have been with you today, Mark. And I know this will be the first of many things that we do together in the future with you and with We Create Space. So thank you again for an amazing 1 hour of my life that I will cherish always.
Thank you, Nancy. Don't make me cry, Nancy. I'm doing so good. I'm not gonna cry. Thank you, everyone. Listen, on behalf of Nancy and myself and the entire We Create Space Global Collective, I want to thank you all for being here. Please spread this message, spread the word. We Create Space is creating spaces around the world that are needed, necessary, and life-saving and life-affirming. And so if you want to spread the work of We Create Space, and you want to bring this to your company, to your organization, to your community, in person or virtual, back with Mayless and Michael. They are fantastic leaders in our field, and you will not regret making space for We Create Space. Mayless, over to you.
I mean, the We Create Space TM, literally, it never gets old, but thank you so much. Mark, Nancy, for this session. It was, I think from my personal perspective, sitting where I'm sitting in this part of the world, in West Africa, leaving the UK, loving the work that I do, but then also seeing so many opportunities to just carry this work forward. It was a lot of words I needed to hear. And so I'm so thankful for this hunch and the fact that we actually moved forward with this idea and put it together. So many takeaways. And for those who attended, please, we encourage you to share this session. It will be made available after it and will be on our YouTube channel. So please send it through to anyone you feel needs to hear this and really ground themselves in their purpose and looking ahead as well to 2023 and the challenges we all have coming up. So this was a beautiful way of us closing the series for this year. We will be back next year in February with more content, more panels, more queer leadership sessions. And we hope that you can all join us again, or if you do have ideas or questions, or even want to put yourself forward as a speaker, as a thinker, as a co-creator, please reach out to us. You can join our newsletter, or again, use social media to find us and share your thoughts. And as always, we're super open to take things on board and drive this change forward. So with that being said, we're on time, minute over. We're going to close it here, and hope you all have a great November. Yes.
A great rest of the year. Be well, everyone.
Great. Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.